I saw my sister Melissa rifling through my closet again, and this time she pulled out the coat, my grandmother's 1950s emerald velvet swing coat with the Persian lamb collar. The one I'd spent 3 years tracking down at estate sales. The one worth $15,000. Don't even think about it, I said from the doorway. She didn't even flinch, just held it up against herself, admiring her reflection. Oh, come on, Emma. It's just sitting here collecting dust. I have that gallery opening tonight, and this would be perfect with my vintage Dior dress. Melissa, that coat is what? Too precious for your own sister to borrow? She was already slipping it on, and I felt my stomach drop. In my first life, this was the moment everything started to unravel. This was the moment I'd said yes, because I always said yes to Melissa, because our mother had trained me from birth to give my sister everything she wanted. But I wasn't that Emma anymore. I'd died 6 months ago, or rather, the old Emma had died. Overdosed on sleeping pills in a dingy studio apartment at 32, alone and penniless, after my family had systematically destroyed every good thing in my life. Then I'd woken up at 25 again, 7 years in the past, with every terrible memory intact. Take it off, I said, my voice colder than I'd ever managed in my first life. Now, Melissa's eyes widened. She wasn't used to this version of me. Wow, okay, someone's having a mood. But she didn't take off the coat. Instead, she smoothed down the collar with a proprietary air. I'll be careful with it, I promise. Mom already said I could borrow something from your room. Of course she had. Our mother, Patricia, had always been Melissa's co-conspirator. In my first life, I'd spent decades trying to understand why my own mother hated me so much, why she'd elevated my younger sister to princess status while treating me like an unwanted servant. I'd never figured it out before I died. Just knew that no matter what I achieved, it was never enough, and whatever Melissa wanted, she got, including apparently permission to raid my belongings whenever she pleased. I don't care what Mom said. That coat is not leaving this room. Melissa laughed, that tinkling sound she'd perfected for charming people at parties. God, you're being so weird lately. Everyone's noticed. Mom thinks you might need therapy. She was already heading toward the door, my coat wrapped around her shoulders like a trophy. I should mention that we didn't just share a house. We were both living in our family's sprawling Boston brownstone, the one that had been in our father's family for 4 generations. Melissa had the entire 3rd floor to herself. I had a converted attic room that still had exposed pipes. This, despite the fact that I'd graduated summa cum laude from Columbia while Melissa had barely scraped through a local art school. In my first life, I'd let her take the coat she'd worn it to the gallery opening, where she'd spilled red wine all down the front and then accidentally left it in the back of an Uber. I'd been devastated. She'd laughed and said I was being dramatic, that it was just a coat. Mom had agreed. Dad, as always, had said nothing. But that coat was more than just vintage fashion. It had belonged to my father's mother, Grandma Helen, the only person in the family who'd ever truly loved me. She'd died when I was 15, and somehow that coat had ended up in a consignment shop 3 states away. I'd found it by accident during a business trip when I was 22, recognized it from old photos, and spent my entire savings to buy it back. In my first life, losing it had been the first in a series of accidents that had gradually stripped me of everything valuable I owned. Melissa had borrowed my grandmother's pearls and claimed they'd been stolen. She'd accidentally donated my entire collection of first edition books to a library sale. She'd somehow gotten access to my savings account, the one I'd stupidly put her name on just in case of emergencies, and drained it to pay for her destination wedding. By the time I was 30, I had nothing left, and by 32, I decided I had nothing left to live for, but rebirth changes a person. Melissa, I said, stepping in front of the door, if you walk out of here with that coat, I will call the police and report it stolen. She actually gasped. You wouldn't dare. Mom would kill you. Try me. For a long moment, we stared at each other. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. The old Emma would have been. The old Emma would have backed down the second Melissa's eyes started to water, would have apologized for being selfish, would have helped her sister zip up the coat and told her she looked beautiful. The new Emma had watched her own funeral in her previous life, had watched from some strange in-between place as exactly 4 people attended. My mother had cried prettily for the cameras. Melissa had worn Gucci. My father had checked his watch twice during the brief service. And my older brother Marcus, who'd moved to Singapore years ago and rarely visited, had been the only one who seemed genuinely sad, though even he'd left before the burial. Not one of them had mentioned that they'd systematically isolated me from every friend I'd ever made, sabotaged every relationship I'd tried to build, and stolen every penny I'd managed to save. Melissa finally huffed and started shrugging out of the coat. Fine, be that way. I'll just tell everyone you're having some kind of breakdown. She threw the coat on my bed with deliberate carelessness. You know what? I'm glad I didn't borrow it. It smells like mothballs anyway. She flounced out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I locked the door behind her, had installed a proper deadbolt last week, something the old Emma would never have thought to do, and picked up the coat, checking it carefully for damage. The velvet was fine, the collar pristine. I buried my face in it for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of Grandma Helen's perfume that somehow still clung to the fabric after all these years. I won't let them destroy me again, I whispered to her memory. Not this time. That had been 3 days ago. Now I was standing in my favorite consignment shop in Cambridge, staring at my own coat hanging on a rack with a $3,000 price tag attached to it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the emerald velvet and feel the world tilt sideways. She'd done it. Even after I'd explicitly told her no, even after I'd threatened to call the police, Melissa had somehow gotten into my room and stolen the coat. And rather than wear it and risk me seeing her in it, she'd sold it. Gorgeous piece, isn't it? The shop owner, Margaret, appeared at my elbow. She was a sophisticated woman in her 60s who'd been running the shop for 30 years. We'd become friendly over the years, or rather, over the 7 years of my first life plus the 6 months of my second. Just came in yesterday. The woman who brought it in was a real piece of work, though, very pushy about the price. Insisted it was worth at least $10,000, but honestly, with the condition issues, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Margaret looked surprised by my tone. Well, yes, there's a small tear in the lining, and the hem has been let down and resewn rather poorly. Still a beautiful coat, of course, but those repairs do affect the value. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Melissa hadn't just stolen the coat, she'd damaged it first, probably deliberately, to make sure I couldn't get full value if I tried to track it down. The woman who brought it in, I said carefully, what did she look like? Oh, let's see. Late 20s, very pretty, blonde, very well dressed. Said it had belonged to her grandmother, but she needed the money for, what was it? Some kind of art project, I think. Margaret tilted her head. Do you know her? You look a bit pale, dear. I knew her, all right. Knew exactly how her mind worked, knew every manipulation tactic she'd ever used. In my first life, I'd spent decades trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, trying to believe that surely my own sister couldn't be actively malicious, that these were all just accidents and misunderstandings, but I'd died knowing the truth. And I'd been reborn with perfect clarity. Margaret, I said slowly, that coat belonged to my grandmother. It was stolen from my room. The woman who brought it in is my sister. Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Oh my God, Emma, I had no idea. Of course you can have it back. I haven't processed the payment yet. She wanted to wait a few days in case I could get a better offer. No, I said, an idea forming in my mind. A beautiful, perfect idea. Don't give it back, not yet. Margaret frowned. But if it's stolen, it is, and I will be reporting it to the police. But first, I need to document everything. When is my sister supposed to come back? She said she'd check in on Friday. That's tomorrow. Tomorrow? Perfect. I spent the rest of that day planning. In my first life, I'd been reactive, always scrambling to deal with whatever new crisis my family created. I'd been so busy trying to please them, trying to earn their love, that I'd never stopped to think strategically. But death teaches you to think differently. Death and rebirth, with the knowledge of exactly how every betrayal would unfold, gave you a certain clarity about priorities. I started by documenting everything. Took photos of the coat at the consignment shop, making sure the price tag and condition notes were visible. Got a written statement from Margaret about when Melissa had brought it in and what she'd said. Pulled up the photos I'd taken of the coat in perfect condition just days ago, the deadbolt on my door clearly visible in the background, showing that my room was locked. Then I went to the police station and filed a theft report. The officer who took my statement was skeptical at first. Family disputes rarely warranted police attention. But when I showed him the documentation, when I explained the value of the coat and showed him the photos proving my sister had sold stolen property, his expression changed. "This is actually pretty serious," he said, reviewing the papers. "Grand larceny, potentially, and selling stolen goods. Does your sister have a criminal record?" "No," I said. She's never faced consequences for anything in her life." The officer gave me a knowing look. "Well, she's about to." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind churning. The coat was just the beginning, just the most recent, most blatant theft in a lifetime of exploitation. But it was also the most provable, the most documented, the most actionable. In my first life, I'd let everything go. Every theft, every betrayal, every act of sabotage. I'd swallowed my anger and told myself that family was more important than possessions, that I was being petty and small-minded for caring about material things. But it had never been about the things themselves. It had been about the message they sent. You don't matter. Your feelings don't matter. You exist to serve us, and we'll take whatever we want from you. I'd internalized that message so deeply that by the time I died, I'd believed I was worthless. Believed I deserved to be alone and broke and hopeless. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was someone who'd seen the truth from the other side of death, and I was done being a victim. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what she'd say. I was right. "Emma, what on earth is going on? Melissa is hysterical. She says, you've filed a police report against her? Over a coat? This is absolutely ridiculous. You need to withdraw that report immediately and apologize to your sister. She's been crying all morning. How could you be so cruel?" Cruel. I'd been called many things in my first life. Difficult, ungrateful, selfish, cold, but never cruel. That word was reserved for victims who finally fought back. I didn't call her back. Instead, I went to work. I was a junior analyst at a financial firm, a job I'd carefully secured 6 months earlier when I'd first woken up in the past. In my first life, I'd stayed at this company for 3 years before Melissa had somehow convinced our father to pressure me into quitting so I could help with the family business. The family business being a boutique hotel chain that Dad ran with Mom's money, and help being code for work 60 hours a week doing Melissa's job while she took credit. I'd been so stupid, so desperately eager for their approval that I'd walked away from a promising career to be their unpaid servant. Not this time. At lunch, I got a text from my brother Marcus. "Mom says you're causing drama." What's going on? Marcus was the wild card. In my first life, we'd barely spoken after he moved to Singapore. He'd been the golden child growing up, the firstborn son, the heir apparent, but he'd shocked everyone by walking away from the family business and building his own tech company overseas. Mom had never forgiven him for it, and Melissa had always resented him for being the one who got away. I'd never known how he really felt about me. We'd been close as children, but by the time I was a teenager, he was already pulling away from the family. At my funeral, he'd seemed sad, but not sad enough to have intervened while I was alive. I texted back, "Melissa stole a $15,000 coat from my locked room and sold it at a consignment shop. I filed a police report. That's what's going on." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Jesus. "Are you okay?" The question surprised me. In my first life, no one had ever asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I typed back. "But I'm done letting them steal from me." "Good," he replied immediately. "I always wondered when you'd figure it out." I stared at that message for a long time. He'd known. He'd known what they were doing to me, and he'd left anyway, saved himself, and never looked back. I couldn't decide if I was angry or if I understood. Probably both. Friday came. I called in sick to work and positioned myself in a coffee shop across from the consignment store, laptop open, looking like just another remote worker. At 2 p.m., right on schedule, Melissa walked in. She was dressed in head-to-toe designer fashion, as always. Chanel bag, Louboutin heels, a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. All of it paid for by our parents, who somehow never seemed to notice that their younger daughter had no income but unlimited expenses, while their son, middle daughter, worked full-time and lived in an attic. I watched through the window as Melissa spoke with Margaret. Even from across the street, I could read the body language. Melissa's confident stride, her dismissive hand gestures, the way she tossed her hair. She was probably asking if Margaret had found a buyer willing to pay more. Then I saw Margaret's expression change. Saw her say something that made Melissa's face go pale. Saw my sister start to argue, gesturing wildly. That was my cue. I packed up my laptop and crossed the street, pushing open the door to the consignment shop just as Melissa was saying, "Absolutely ridiculous. That coat was mine to sell. My grandmother gave it to—" "She gave it to me," I said quietly. Melissa spun around, her face cycling through several expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, calculation. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "Taking back my property." I turned to Margaret, but did you call them?" "They're on their way," Margaret confirmed. "Call who?" Melissa's voice went shrill. "What is she talking about?" "The police," I said calmly. "I filed a theft report. You stole a $15,000 coat from my locked room and sold it." "That's grand larceny." For a moment, Melissa just stared at me. Then she laughed, that same tinkling laugh that usually charmed everyone. "Oh my God, you actually called the police? Over a coat?" "Emma, this is insane. Mom was right. You really have lost it." "I have photos of the coat in my room dated 3 days before you sold it. I have a written statement from Margaret about when you brought it in and what you told her. I have receipts proving I purchased the coat 3 years ago for $13,000. And I have photos of the damage you did to it before selling it, presumably to prevent me from getting full value back." I pulled out my phone, showing her the evidence I'd compiled. "You're going to jail, Melissa." Her face went white. "You're bluffing. Mom will what? Pay for your lawyer? Probably, but she can't change the facts. You committed a crime, a provable crime, and I'm pressing charges." "You're my sister," Melissa hissed, dropping the charming act. How can you do this to me over a stupid coat?" "It was never about the coat," I said softly. "It was about you thinking you could take whatever you wanted from me and I'd never fight back." The police arrived 10 minutes later. 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, both professional and efficient. I handed over my documentation. Melissa tried to cry, tried to explain that this was all a misunderstanding, tried to claim the coat had been a gift. But I'd learned something in my previous life. In those long years of being gaslit and manipulated, documentation beats emotion every time. The officers looked at my evidence, looked at Melissa's complete lack of evidence, and made their decision. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us to answer some questions," the male officer said to Melissa. "This is insane!" Melissa's voice was no longer tinkling. "I'm not going anywhere. Do you know who my father is?" "That doesn't matter, ma'am. Please come with us voluntarily or we'll have to—" "I'll call Dad," Melissa interrupted, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "He'll clear this up. Your father can meet you at the station," the female officer said firmly. I watched as they escorted my sister out of the shop, her designer heels clicking against the floor, her Chanel bag swinging from her arm. She looked back at me once, and the expression on her face was pure hatred. Good. I wanted her to hate me. Hate was honest. Hate was real. Better than the fake love she'd been performing for years while systematically destroying my life. After they left, Margaret handed me the coat. "No charge, obviously. I'm so sorry this happened, Emma. I had no idea." "You couldn't have known," I said, running my hands over the velvet. The damage Melissa had done was obvious now that I was looking for it. The torn lining, the crude stitching at the hem. It would cost money to repair, but it could be repaired, unlike my life in the previous timeline, which had been damaged beyond saving. My phone started ringing before I even left the shop. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then Dad, then Mom again, then a number I didn't recognize, probably one of their friends, recruited to tell me I was being unreasonable. I turned off my phone and went home. The house was empty when I arrived. Mom and Dad had clearly rushed to the police station to rescue their princess. I went straight to my attic room, locked the deadbolt, and allowed myself a moment to just breathe. In my first life, this would have been the moment I caved. The moment I decided that family harmony was more important than justice, that I was being petty and vindictive, that I should just let it go. But I'd already let everything go once, and it had killed me. I pulled out my laptop and started documenting everything else. Every theft, every accident, every act of sabotage I could remember from my first life. The pearls Melissa would lose next month. The first edition books she'd donate in 18 months. The savings account she'd drain in 3 years when I made the mistake of adding her as an authorized user. None of that was going to happen this time, but I documented it anyway, creating a detailed timeline of everything I remembered. Not because I could use it as evidence, you can't prove crimes that haven't happened yet, but because I needed the reminder. Needed to remember why I was doing this, why I couldn't back down. They came home around 8 p.m. I heard the front door slam, heard my mother's heels on the stairs, heard her pounding on my door. Then Emma Louise, you open this door right now. I stayed silent, sitting on my bed with the coat folded in my lap. I know you're in there. What you did today was absolutely unforgivable. Your sister is traumatized. Do you understand what you've put her through? Still silent. The charges will be dropped, obviously. Your father's handling it, but you owe Melissa an enormous apology, and you need therapy. This obsession with material possessions is deeply unhealthy. I almost laughed. I'd been thinking about how they'd spin this, and of course they'd gone with the Emma is mentally ill narrative. Easier than admitting their golden child was a thief. I'm calling Dr. Morrison in the morning, Mom continued. He'll see you this week. And you're going to apologize to your sister, and you're going to withdraw that police report, and then we're all going to move past this unfortunate incident. Unfortunate incident. That's what my entire life had been to them, a series of unfortunate incidents that happened to occur around Melissa's desires and ambitions. Emma, I'm not leaving until you answer me. Go away, Mom. Silence. Then, what did you just say to me? I said go away. I'm not apologizing. I'm not withdrawing the report, and I'm not seeing Dr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison was the family therapist who'd spent my entire adolescence trying to convince me that my negative feelings about Melissa were signs of jealousy and poor character. Melissa committed a crime. She needs to face consequences. She's your sister. And that's supposed to mean she gets to steal from me? It was one coat, one material object. How can you value a coat over your own family? I stood up and walked to the door, though I didn't unlock it. Mom, in the past year, Melissa has taken over $15,000 worth of my belongings. The coat is just the most recent theft. And I'm not talking about borrowing. I'm talking about taking my things and selling them or destroying them or losing them. And you've never once made her replace them or even apologize. That's not, you're exaggerating. My grandmother's pearls, the ones Grandma Helen left specifically to me in her will. Melissa borrowed them for a date and claimed they were stolen from her car, but I saw them in a pawn shop 2 weeks later and had to buy them back myself. Silence. My first edition Jane Austen collection, the one I'd been building since I was 16, Melissa accidentally donated it to a library sale while I was on a work trip. I found out when the library thanked our family for the generous $5,000 donation and posted photos on Facebook. More silence. Those were accidents, Mom said, but her voice was weaker now. Melissa would never deliberately assume. She stole a coat from my locked room and sold it at a consignment shop, Mom. She damaged it first to lower the value. Does that sound like an accident? I heard my father's voice from the hallway, low and rumbling. Patricia, leave her alone. We'll deal with this in the morning. But Richard, I said leave her. Footsteps retreated down the hallway. I waited until I heard their bedroom door closed, then finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness, though there was some of that. Mourning the family I'd never really had, the mother who'd never loved me, the sister who'd seen me as competition instead of kin. But mostly from relief, because I'd done it. I'd stood up to them. I'd said no and meant it, and the world hadn't ended. I was still here. I was still breathing. I was still Emma, but a stronger version. A version who'd learned that you can't love people into treating you well, that family isn't an excuse for abuse, that sometimes the only way to survive is to walk away, or in this case, to fight back. The next morning, I woke to find an email from a lawyer, a fancy one based on the letterhead, one of Boston's most expensive firms. They were representing Melissa and demanding I withdraw my complaint, threatening to sue me for defamation and emotional distress if I continued to harass their client. I forwarded it to my own lawyer. Yes, I'd gotten a lawyer, first thing Monday morning after filing the police report. Margaret had recommended her, a sharp woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in property law and family disputes. Sarah called me within an hour. Well, they're certainly pulling out the big guns, but this is actually good news. How is being threatened with a lawsuit good news? Because it means they're scared. If your sister were genuinely innocent, they'd be focusing on proving that, not trying to intimidate you into silence. I could hear the smile in her voice. The damage to the coat is particularly damning. It shows premeditation. She didn't just impulsively take it. She deliberately reduced its value before selling it. Can they actually sue me? They can try, they won't win. You have documentation, witnesses, and physical evidence. What do they have? A story about how the coat was a gift, which they can't prove. Any judge would throw it out. She paused. Emma, I want to be clear with you. This is going to get ugly. Your family is going to do everything they can to pressure you into backing down. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my first life. Thought about dying alone in that studio apartment, overdosed on sleeping pills with nothing and no one. Thought about being so ground down by years of abuse that I genuinely believed the world would be better without me. I'm prepared, I said. And I was. The next 2 weeks were brutal. My mother called daily, alternating between rage and tears. My father showed up at my office trying to have a rational discussion about how I was tearing the family apart. Melissa sent me long, rambling text messages that swung wildly between apologizing and threatening me. I blocked them all. Friends of the family started reaching out, people I'd known my whole life, all telling me some version of the same story. Families fight, I was being too harsh. Surely I could forgive my sister, blood is thicker than water, on and yeah, on. I blocked them too. The only person I stayed in contact with was Marcus. He called from Singapore 2 days after Melissa's arrest. So you really did it, he said without preamble. I really did. Good. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry I left you there with them. You had to save yourself. Maybe. But I could have tried to take you with me, could have offered you a job, helped you get away. Instead, I just left. Another pause. I told myself you were fine, that you were strong enough to handle them, but I knew better. I just didn't want to deal with the drama. I didn't know what to say to that. In my first life, his abandonment had been absolute. After he left for Singapore, I'd seen him maybe 5 times in 7 years, and never for more than a few days. He'd missed birthdays, holidays, every family event he could avoid. I'd resented it then. Now I understood it. You couldn't have saved me, I said finally. I had to save myself. I guess that's true. He cleared his throat. Listen, I know you're working at that financial firm, but if you ever want to get out of Boston, away from them, I've got connections in Singapore. Tech companies are always looking for analysts with your credentials. I could make some calls. It was tempting. So tempting. Just run away. Start over somewhere they couldn't reach me. But I'd already tried that in my first life, not Singapore, but other cities, other jobs, other attempts to build a life separate from my family. It had never worked because I'd never truly broken free, had never cut the ties that let them keep pulling me back. Maybe someday, I said. But right now, I need to finish this. Finish what? Getting justice. The court date was set for 6 weeks after Melissa's arrest. In Massachusetts, grand larceny cases moved relatively quickly, especially when the evidence was overwhelming. Sarah was confident we'd win. The question was what kind of sentence Melissa would get. First offense, good family, expensive lawyers, Sarah explained during one of our prep sessions. Realistically, she's looking at probation and restitution, maybe community service. The judge might be lenient given the family circumstances. That's it? I felt a flash of anger. Imaz, she steals $15,000 worth of property and gets a slap on the wrist? Welcome to the justice system. Sarah's expression was sympathetic. But Emma, the criminal case is just one piece. We can also pursue a civil case for all the other thefts. The pearls, the books, anything else you can document. Build a pattern of behavior. Make it clear this wasn't an isolated incident. Can we win that? If you have evidence, yes. Even circumstantial evidence can help. Social media posts showing her wearing your pearls, the library's documentation of the book donation, receipts showing you had to buy back your own property. It adds up. I thought about the timeline I'd created, all the thefts I remembered from my first life. Most of them hadn't happened yet in this timeline, but a few had. The pearls, definitely. That had been last year. Some jewelry that had mysteriously vanished from my room. A designer handbag I'd saved for months to buy, which Melissa had borrowed and returned with mysterious damage that made it unsellable. I have evidence, I said, a lot of it, Sarah smiled. Then let's build a case. While we prepped for court, I finally turned my phone back on. The voicemails and texts were overwhelming. Hundreds of messages, most of them hostile. Friends of my parents telling me I was destroying the family. Distant relatives I barely knew lecturing me about forgiveness. Even some of my own acquaintances, people I'd thought were friends, telling me I was being too harsh. Only a handful of messages were supportive. A former colleague from work who said she'd always thought my family treated me badly. A friend from college I'd lost touch with who said she was glad I was finally standing up for myself. And one message that made me stop breathing. Emma, this is Grandma Helen's friend Dorothy. I don't know if you remember me. We met at your grandmother's funeral. I heard about what's happening with your sister, and I want you to know that Helen would be so proud of you. She always worried about how your family treated you. She tried to protect you in her will, but your mother found ways around most of it. If you need someone to talk to, please call me. I have some things of your grandmother's that she wanted you to have. I called her immediately. Dorothy was in her 80s now, living in a retirement community in Newton. She invited me to visit that weekend, and I went, half expecting, I don't know what. Some emotional closure, maybe? A connection to the one person who'd truly loved me. What I got was so much more. Dorothy's apartment was small but elegantly furnished, full of antiques and old photographs. She made tea, sat me down on her velvet sofa, and said, Your grandmother knew what they were doing to you. She saw it clearly, even when you were too young to understand it yourself. I don't understand, I said. If she knew, why didn't she? She tried. Dorothy's eyes were sad. She tried to leave you everything, the house, the trust fund, all of it. But your father was her only child, and Massachusetts law makes it very difficult to completely disinherit a child. So she compromised. Left the house to Richard with the stipulation that you'd always have a home there. Left a trust fund split between you and Marcus, with Melissa getting a smaller amount. Made specific bequests to you, the pearls, some jewelry, that coat. But Melissa took the pearls and the coat. I know, your mother has been systematically undermining Helen's wishes since the day she died. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Dorothy stood and walked to a bedroom, returning with a small wooden box. Helen gave me these for safekeeping, said, if anything ever happened to her, and if you ever needed proof of how she felt about you, I should give them to you. She opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. Letters to her lawyer, to my father, to me. Letters documenting her concerns about how I was being treated, her attempts to protect me, her wishes for my future. She wrote these over the last 5 years of her life, Dorothy said softly. She was very sick at the end. and she knew your mother would try to control the narrative after she was gone. These letters are her testimony. I picked up the first one, dated a year before Grandma Helen died. It was addressed to her lawyer. Dear Mr. Peterson, I am writing to express my grave concerns about my granddaughter Emma's welfare. I have observed a pattern of favoritism and neglect within my son's household that troubles me deeply. My daughter-in-law Patricia shows clear preference for Melissa, while Emma is treated as an afterthought at best and a servant at worst. I have witnessed Patricia taking money from Emma's savings to pay for Melissa's extravagances. I have seen Emma's accomplishments minimized while Melissa's mediocre efforts are celebrated. I have watched my son stand by and allow this mistreatment, too weak to stand up to his wife. I want my will structured to protect Emma specifically. The trust fund must be in her name only, with no access granted to Patricia or Richard. The pearls, the coat, and the other items I've specified must go directly to Emma, with clear legal language preventing them from being borrowed or shared with Melissa. Emma is a brilliant, kind, sensitive girl who deserves so much better than what her parents are giving her. I won't be alive to protect her much longer. My estate is the only weapon I have left. I looked up at Dorothy, tears streaming down my face. I never knew she saw it. She saw everything, and she tried to stop it. But your mother is a very clever woman. After Helen died, Patricia convinced Richard to contest certain aspects of the will. They tied it up in probate for 2 years, and by the time it was settled, many of Helen's specific wishes had been diluted. The trust fund, I said suddenly. I have a trust fund. Dorothy nodded, saying, supposed to be released to you when you turn 30, but I'd bet my last dollar that Patricia has already figured out a way to access it or convince you to sign it over to the family. In my first life, I'd never lived to see 30. Had died at 32, yes, but the trust fund. I'd never known it existed. Had never asked about my grandmother's estate, had assumed everything had gone to my parents. How much? I asked. The original amount was $500,000. With investment growth over the past decade, Dorothy did some mental math. Probably close to $1 million by now. $1 million? Hidden from me, likely stolen or diverted by my parents, while I'd struggled to pay rent and buy back my own possessions from pawn shops. I need to call my lawyer, I said. The civil case expanded. What had started as a simple property theft became something much larger, a systematic pattern of financial abuse, theft, and exploitation spanning over a decade. Sarah brought in a forensic accountant to trace the trust fund, and what we found was damning. My father, as executor of Grandma Helen's estate, had technically maintained the trust fund, but he'd been drawing from it for years, using the money to fund Melissa's lifestyle while telling me the estate had been smaller than expected. He'd paid for Melissa's art school, her car, her apartment, her trips to Europe, all from money that was legally mine. The total amount? Over $600,000 with interest. This is elder fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with righteous anger. Your father is in serious legal trouble, and your mother, as the one who directed many of these expenditures, could be considered a co-conspirator. Will they go to jail? Unlikely, given their age and lack of criminal history. But they'll have to repay every penny with interest. We're talking about complete restitution, possibly forcing them to sell assets. The house, for instance. The house. The family brownstone that had been in my father's family for 4 generations. The house where I'd grown up, where I'd been relegated to the attic while Melissa lived in luxury. The house that Grandma Helen had wanted me to always have a home in. Good, I said. The criminal trial for Melissa's theft happened first. It was a short trial. The evidence was too clear for much argument. She took the stand in her own defense, crying prettily, explaining how she'd always had boundary issues with her sister's things, how she truly believed the coat was a family heirloom she had a right to sell, how she'd never meant to hurt me. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Martinez, methodically destroyed every argument, showed photos of my locked bedroom door, played audio from Margaret describing how Melissa had claimed the coat was from her own grandmother, presented evidence of the deliberate damage to reduce the coat's value. This wasn't a mistake, Lisa told the jury. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated theft. The defendant broke into her sister's locked room, stole an item worth $15,000, deliberately damaged it to prevent recovery of full value, and sold it for personal gain. And when confronted, she lied repeatedly to cover her tracks. This is not the behavior of someone who made an innocent mistake. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Melissa sobbed as the verdict was read. My mother clutched my father's arm, both of them looking shocked. They'd truly believed their money and connections would save her. But I'd learned something in my first life. Documentation beats emotion. Evidence beats charm. Truth, properly presented, beats lies. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen her share of entitled criminals. Ms. Chen, she said, looking directly at Melissa, you come from a privileged background. You've had every advantage in life, and yet you chose to steal from your own sister, not once, but as part of a pattern of behavior that this court finds deeply disturbing. She sentenced Melissa to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of the coat's value, plus legal fees. Additionally, she issued a restraining order preventing Melissa from coming near me or my property. If you violate the terms of this probation, the judge warned, you will serve time in prison. I suggest you use this opportunity to reflect on your choices and become a better person. Melissa looked at me as she left the courtroom, and the hatred in her eyes was pure and absolute. Good. I'd rather have her hatred than her fake love. The civil case took longer. 8 months of depositions, document review, and legal maneuvering. My parents tried everything to avoid accountability. They claimed the trust fund had been mismanaged by the original executor, that they'd had permission to use the funds, that I was being vindictive and cruel. But Dorothy's letters were damning. Grandma Helen had explicitly stated that the money was for me alone, that it was not to be touched for any other purpose. And the forensic accountant's report showed a clear trail of money being diverted from my trust to pay for Melissa's lifestyle. The judge in the civil case was even less sympathetic than the criminal judge. She ordered full restitution of the $600,000, plus interest, plus punitive damages, bringing the total to nearly $1 million. Your conduct was reprehensible, she told my parents. You systematically stole from your own daughter for over a decade. You violated your fiduciary duty as executor. You betrayed the explicit wishes of the deceased, and you showed no remorse until you were caught. This court finds that you are unfit to manage any further trusts or estates. My father's face went gray. My mother actually fainted and had to be helped from the courtroom. I felt nothing, or maybe not nothing, maybe relief. Justice, finally. Accountability. Proof that I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive, that the abuse had been real and wrong. To pay the judgment, my parents had to sell the brownstone. The house that had been in the family for generations went on the market for $3.2 million. It sold in 3 days to a tech entrepreneur from California who was relocating to Boston. I used part of my settlement to buy a beautiful condo in Cambridge, overlooking the Charles River. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a real kitchen, and most importantly, a door that locked and stayed locked. Melissa spiraled. Without my parents' financial support, all their liquid assets had gone to paying me. She couldn't maintain her lifestyle. She lost her apartment, had to sell her designer wardrobe, ended up moving in with a friend. Her social media, once full of glamorous photos and humble brags, went silent. I didn't gloat, didn't post about my victory or rub her face in it. I just moved on. Built the life I should have had the first time around, the life Grandma Helen had wanted for me. 6 months after the civil case concluded, Marcus flew back to Boston. It was the first time I'd seen him in person since my rebirth, and he looked older, more tired. Success in Singapore hadn't been easy, I realized. He'd built something impressive, but he'd done it alone, cutting himself off from his family to survive. We met for dinner at an upscale restaurant in the Back Bay. He was already there when I arrived, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "You look good," he said as I sat down. "Really good, healthy." "I feel good," I said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I feel good." We ordered wine, made small talk about his company and my job, danced around the elephant in the room. Finally, over dessert, he said, I need to apologize to you. Marcus, no, let me say this. He put down his fork, met my eyes. I knew what they were doing to you. I saw it when we were kids, and I saw it get worse as we got older. And I left you there. Told myself you were fine, that you were strong enough to handle it, but really I was just relieved to be free myself. You were, I said. Free, I mean. You got out. That took strength. It took cowardice, he corrected. Real strength would have been staying and fighting, or taking you with me, or at least checking on you more often, making sure you were okay. He shook his head. When Mom called and told me what was happening, the lawsuit, the criminal case, all of it, my first reaction was to think you were overreacting. Because that's what I'd trained myself to believe, that Mom and Dad were difficult but not abusive, that Melissa was spoiled but not malicious, that you were fine. I wasn't fine, I said quietly. I was drowning. I know. His voice broke. And I let it happen, so I'm sorry. I'm deeply, truly sorry. And I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, I forgive you. He looked startled. Just like that? Just like that. I smiled slightly. You weren't the one stealing from me or abusing me. You were just absent. And I understand why. They would have destroyed you too if you'd stayed. Maybe. He pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. This is for you. Inside was a check for $100,000. Marcus, I can't. It's not charity. It's investment capital. He leaned forward. You're smart, Emma. Brilliant, actually. Always have been. You should start your own company, build something that's entirely yours. This is seed money. Use it however you want. Start a business, invest it, buy more property. Just promise me you'll do something ambitious with it. Something that makes you happy. I looked at the check, at my brother's earnest face, and felt something crack open in my chest. He was actually trying to make amends, not just with words, but with action. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for not giving up on yourself, he replied. When Mom first told me what you were doing, prosecuting Melissa, suing them, part of me was shocked. But then I thought about it and realized you were the bravest person in our family. The only one who'd ever stood up and demanded better. We talked for another hour about his life in Singapore, about my plans for the future, about our parents and whether we'd ever speak to them again. I wouldn't. Marcus was still undecided. It felt like we were finally, truly siblings. Not rivals for our parents' attention, not strangers with a shared last name, but actual family. When we left the restaurant, he hugged me tight and said, I'm proud of you, Emma. Grandma Helen would be proud too. I cried all the way home. 2 years after my rebirth, I was barely recognizable from the woman I'd been. I'd been promoted twice at work, earning a senior analyst position with a salary that let me live comfortably and save aggressively. I'd started investing, real investing, not just putting money in a savings account, and my portfolio was growing steadily. I'd made new friends, real friends who liked me for who I was and didn't have any connection to my family. I'd started dating a kind, funny man named David, who worked in software engineering and thought I was amazing exactly as I was. I'd repaired Grandma Helen's coat, found a specialist in vintage clothing who'd carefully restored the lining and fixed the hem. It hung in my closet now, wrapped in acid-free tissue, more precious to me than ever because I'd fought for it, bled for it, refused to let them take it from me. And I'd used Marcus's investment to start a small consulting firm helping victims of financial abuse navigate the legal system. It was part-time right now, something I did on weekends and evenings, but it was growing. Other people who'd been stolen from by family members, who'd been gaslit and manipulated and made to feel crazy for wanting their own property back. I helped them document their cases, connected them with lawyers like Sarah, gave them the courage to fight back because I'd learned something through all of this. I wasn't the only one. There were thousands of people out there who'd been victimized by their own families, who'd been taught that love meant accepting abuse, who'd been ground down until they believed they deserved nothing. They deserved better. They deserved justice. And I was going to help them get it. One Saturday afternoon, 3 years after my rebirth, I was in my home office working on a case file when my doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something made me check the camera. It was my mother. I hadn't seen her since the civil trial, hadn't spoken to her, hadn't read her emails, had blocked her number and all her social media accounts. She looked older now, grayer, the expensive highlights gone from her hair and the designer clothes replaced with something off the rack. I could have pretended I wasn't home, could have let her stand there until she gave up and left. Instead, I opened the door. "Emma," she said, and her voice was different, smaller, less certain. "Thank you for seeing me." "I'm not inviting you in," I said. "You have 5 minutes. Say whatever you came to say." She flinched but nodded. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I was a terrible mother. I know I failed you in every way that matters." She took a shaky breath. "I've been in therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where I complain about how difficult my children are. The kind where I had to look at my own behavior and admit what I'd done." "And what did you do?" I asked coldly. "I scapegoated you, made you the family servant because it was easier than dealing with my own issues. I favored Melissa because she was compliant and you were independent, and I hated that you didn't need me the way she did." She was crying now, but I felt nothing. "I stole from you, abused you, let your sister abuse you, destroyed every good thing you tried to build because I was jealous of your strength." "Jealous?" I repeated flatly. "You ruined my life because you were jealous?" "I ruined your life because I'm a weak, bitter woman who took out her unhappiness on her own daughter." She wiped her eyes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to know that I understand what I did. I understand it was wrong, and I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long moment, this broken woman on my doorstep, crying and apologizing. In my first life, I would have melted. Would have invited her in, made her tea, told her it was okay, fallen right back into the cycle of abuse. But I'd died and been reborn, and I'd learned that some things can't be forgiven, shouldn't be forgiven. That moving on doesn't require reconciliation, that healing doesn't mean pretending the wounds never happened. "Thank you for the apology," I said finally. "But I don't want you in my life. Not now, not ever. You had 32 years to be a decent mother, and you chose cruelty every single time. I'm done giving you chances to hurt me." "I understand," she whispered. "Can I just ask, are you happy? Are you okay?" I thought about my life now, my job, my condo, my friends, David, my consulting firm, all the people I'd helped, all the justice I'd achieved. Thought about waking up every morning without the weight of their expectations and abuse crushing me. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm thriving. Goodbye, Mom." I closed the door in her face and went back to my office. I had work to do, cases to build, people to help. I had a life to live. The life Grandma Helen had wanted for me, the life I'd fought and bled for, the life I'd literally died and been reborn to achieve. That night, David came over for dinner. We cooked together in my beautiful kitchen, drank wine on my balcony overlooking the river, talked about our days and our dreams and our future. He'd proposed last month, and we were planning a small wedding for the fall. Marcus was flying in from Singapore to walk me down the aisle. Dorothy would be there, and Sarah, and a dozen other people who'd helped me rebuild my life. My parents wouldn't be invited. Neither would Melissa, though the restraining order would have prevented her from attending anyway. And I was okay with that. More than okay. I'd spent my first life trying to earn their love, and it had killed me. I'd spent my second life learning that you can't earn what someone refuses to give, that some people are incapable of love, that the only person who could save me was myself. I'd learned that justice matters, that documentation beats emotion, that standing up for yourself isn't cruel, even when they tell you it is. That family isn't an excuse for abuse and forgiveness isn't mandatory. I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, thriving, becoming everything they told you that you couldn't be. And I'd learned that a second chance at life is a gift, but only if you're brave enough to live it differently. As I fell asleep that night, wrapped in David's arms, I thought about the coat. Grandma Helen's emerald velvet swing coat with the Persian lamb collar hanging safely in my closet. The coat that had started everything. That had been my line in the sand. That had given me the courage to finally fight back. It was just a coat, but it was also a symbol of love, of inheritance, of refusing to let them steal from me anymore, of the woman I'd become, the woman who'd died and been reborn and chosen, this time, to save herself. I smiled into the darkness and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma Helen. I finally did it. I'm finally free." And I was. 5 years after my rebirth, I stood in front of the Boston courthouse where I'd testified against my sister all those years ago. But today, I wasn't here as a victim or a plaintiff. Today, I was here as an expert witness in someone else's case, a young woman whose family had stolen her inheritance just like mine had stolen from me. My consulting firm had grown into a full-fledged nonprofit organization, helping hundreds of victims of financial abuse every year. We'd successfully prosecuted dozens of cases, recovered millions of dollars in stolen assets, and changed several state laws around fiduciary duty and elder fraud. David and I had been married for 3 years now, and we'd just found out I was pregnant. A daughter, the ultrasound had revealed. We were going to name her Helen Marcus. Visited twice a year, and had made me a silent partner in his tech company. My investment portfolio had grown to nearly $3 million. I owned my condo outright, plus 2 rental properties in Cambridge that provided steady passive income. And most importantly, I was happy. Genuinely, deeply, peacefully happy. I still thought about my first life sometimes. The loneliness, the desperation, the pills I'd swallowed in that studio apartment. I thought about the woman I'd been, who'd believed she was worthless because that's what her family had told her. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was Emma Chen Morrison, advocate, survivor, fighter. I was someone who'd died and been reborn and chosen, the second time around, to save not just herself, but others like her. And as I walked into the courthouse to help another victim get justice, I touched the small locket around my neck, a gift from Dorothy containing a photo of Grandma Helen. "We did it," I whispered. "We broke the cycle.